Welcome to the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast. This Specialty Pharmacy Podcast is a collaboration with the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy, the NASP, and the Pharmacy Podcast Network. The mission of the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy is to improve specialty pharmacy practice by promoting continuing professional education and certification of specialty pharmacists, while advocating for public policies that ensure patient access to specialty medications. As the healthcare industry's leading podcast dedicated to the pharmacy profession, the Pharmacy Podcast Network is proud to bring our listeners the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast in partnership with the NASP.
Sheila Arquette, the Executive Director for the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy, and you are listening to the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast on the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Today, joining me on the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast is Christopher Kennedy, the Chief Operating Officer for Heritage Biologics. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Looking forward to a good discussion.
As am I. Thank you so much. So tell us a little bit about Heritage Biologics.
Heritage Biologics. Well, Sheila, so we're actually headquartered right in the middle of the U.S. in good old Kansas City. We're licensed nationwide. We also have home infusion nursing here at Heritage Biologics. And our focus when building our infrastructure was really around being more than just the pharmacy or the nursing component and really evolving into rare disease outcomes management. So we have a program we call RDOM we take a lot of pride in and really towards measuring outcomes, both health outcomes and then also the patient experience metrics that today oftentimes are around us. And I think there's an opportunity for all of us in pharmacy to do a better job of capturing those feedback sets. And so that's kind of been our overall mission.
Excellent. And so tell us a little bit about your role at Heritage Biologics.
Yeah, so I feel like I've been in a multifaceted role since joining the organization. We started about 3 years ago looking at the marketplace for where we thought we could deliver a new model of care. We call it nbsp or value-based specialty pharmacy. And early on, we partnered with Harvard Business School, Dr. Mehek Shah, who's a value-based care leader, and sat down and said, you know, in the role that I have within Heritage as the Chief Operating Officer, what can we do operationally to really deliver a new value to the stakeholders? So we talk about the four stakeholders, as many of us do in pharmacy. You know, obviously the patient being first, the provider also though, right? So the physician or clinician, how can we provide value to them? Ultimately the payer, right? The person that's paying the tab, whether that's an insurance company or an employer group. And then the manufacturer as well, right? So a new clinical trial is released on a new therapy, and we feel there's a great amount of data that we can provide value back to the manufacturer on how is that data looking in the real world with our patients, et cetera. So I think that's been more of my role as managing the overall business model and then tweaking it, right, with the real feedback that we're getting from patients and the providers themselves.
Sure, absolutely. In my former life as, you know, the pharmacy director for a health plan, we always said that, you know, our number one and number two customers in no real apparent order were obviously our members or our patients and then also our providers. So let's talk a little bit about patient experience and what is Heritage Biologics doing with respect to patient experience, especially looking at, you know, new and innovative ways to engage the patient and to ensure that you're meeting their needs.
Sure, and I think this is a testament to our owner, Tom O'Neill, but his task that he gave me right when I joined the company was how can we really make the patient voice and that patient's journey meaningful in the actual outcome of that patient's care. So we sat down and we said, well, where are the thought leaders at today in patient experience? And what we learned was, you know, the vast majority of, quote, patient experience, that tagline back in 2014, 2015 was in our hospital systems around HCAPS metrics. And so, you know, CMS holds hospitals accountable on patients that will fill out surveys when they get discharged from a hospital. And we thought to ourselves, what if we could continue that type of feedback loop into the outpatient centers where we end up managing a lot of patients? And so we went to the Barrel Institute, which has, I think there are around 60,000 hospital members today. And we said, how can pharmacy learn from the formalized programs in the hospital institutions today. And there's some phenomenal thought leaders out there. Jason Wolf is one of them, who is the president of the Barrel Institute. And then we send our staff, a good portion of our staff, through official training there to really be able to speak the language of what patient experience not only is from an overarching commercial aspect, right? To say you have a great customer service or patient experience team is much different than having deliverable metrics from those programs. And so today we have a formalized group of 6 full-time patient experience folks, and their objective is much like case managers within a hospital, with the additional responsibility of helping patients navigate the complex, waters, if you will, of healthcare. And so sometimes those phone calls that come into us, well, they might not look like they're related to compliance or adherence. They might very well be if a patient, for example, is going through depression or they lost a loved one, et cetera. So there's a social services component to patient experience to keep our patients truly engaged in their costly therapies over time. And I think to do that, Sheila, right, the root of your question is, well, what are you doing? We built a system we call Rare Care, and it really is a real-time data feedback system. So, for example, if a patient's getting a 8-hour home infusion on an immune therapy like IVIG, for example, we wanted to redesign what a nursing engagement looks like and turn it into a data gathering event. So our nurse has a handheld device, which isn't anything novel in this market, but the software and the process of what we capture is a bit different. So there's certain questions on there that align very much to HCAHPS metrics that give the patient not only the ability to provide feedback, but also an open text field where they can tell us, for example, they might not feel safe in their home. That's why they don't want to get their next infusion. And at first, we didn't know what to do with this data, right? You can imagine 3 years ago. Somebody says they don't feel safe in their current environment. Well, we're a pharmacy and a nursing company. What do we do? And so we needed to construct a mechanism so that we could help patients be connected with appropriate resources, whether it's counseling, et cetera. And I think that's been a differentiator is not so much the data that we capture, but what we do with it to make it true insights. And through the handheld device, there's also the ability to provide a dashboard back to the stakeholders, in your case, Sheila, from your background, the people that are paying the tab or determining who they're going to partner with from a provider standpoint. We're able to provide those data sets back to the stakeholders in an appropriate way that shows if we're actually performing at a high level for the patient. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally makes sense. And that's then actionable data, right, for all of the stakeholders.
Yeah, it's scary too, though, right? The downside of that is if our nursing interaction wasn't that strong or if we messed up on delivery, that feedback is in real time as well. And so I think one of the obstacles to really getting more folks on board with joining in the true data share is that, it's not in a vacuum. And so there's going to be outliers, but that's healthcare, right? It's an evolving thing. And for us, it's been great to show that, hey, there was an issue, for example, and here's what we did to address it in real time. It also aligns very much with both URAC and ACHC accreditation standards when it comes to tracking a lot of these different data sets. We take a lot of pride in being dual accredited, but I think for us, the reason we wanted to be accredited was to speak a common language with our other pharmacy colleagues, because I think moving forward, this can really be a platform for the decision makers in healthcare to say, hey, in our provider network, we want this information and we want it standardized.
Right, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about some of the augmented reality tools that you're utilizing.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, it's a passion point for me. Michael Porter actually wrote an article in December's Harvard Business Review about how every company, no matter what business you're in, needs to have an AR strategy, an augmented reality strategy. So when I hear AR, my first thing was is that virtual reality? So you have the VR and you have the AR. And essentially, the reason this technology that we're using for vein viewing is called AR is because there's a wand available today, a handheld wand, if you will. It projects an image and it reads the hemoglobin under the patient's skin and actually projects the vascularity of a patient's arm very quickly, painlessly, right? It's like a high, I don't like to say flashlight, but it projects an image that can be captured. It can also show the flow. So if you were to touch a vein in an arm, you can actually see the blood flow back and forth. Very remarkable. And what it does, though, from an education standpoint is we've had patients that we've had on service for a few years. Some of them have been patients their entire lives, like a hemophilia patient, have never seen that true vascularity of their arm outside of their naked eye. And so you can educate a patient on vein mapping, where if they're self-infusing, they can know where to go for their primary vein. You can evaluate the depth or the complexity of access to their veins, again, helping with best practices and efficiency. And then from our nursing standpoint, if you can ensure first stick, let's say, for some of these complex medical conditions, that really helps with adherence and compliance in the future, and patients aren't so weary of having that nurse come back in the home. So from a patient experience standpoint, we're trying to find new innovative technologies that will advance our agenda to make sure the patient has the best concierge medicine experience that we can provide. And so we're really excited. We just started a clinical trial, a case study actually. It'll be a write-up on all of our nurses are using these devices for the next 6 months. So I'll be really excited to report that feedback when we get it. But early on here, we've seen tremendous patient feedback through our Rare Care portal. Was that helpful?
That was totally helpful, and that was awesome. And I look forward to discussing more with you about some of the innovative tools and devices that you're using. But right now, we're going to take a quick break for a message from our sponsors.
As the specialty pharmacy landscape continues to rapidly evolve, a new patient-centered approach to care has emerged. Physicians, payers, employer groups, and manufacturers are demanding an alternative to the traditional pharmacy product distribution model. Heritage Biologics Rare Disease Outcomes Management Program delivers a first-in-class value-based specialty pharmacy solution that has turned patient experience into a measurable outcome. Patient-reported outcomes, measures, and quality of life assessments are combined with pharmacy patient experience metrics to provide real-time analytics for all stakeholders involved in the continuum of care for each patient. Heritage's commitment to this high-performance collaborative care model is redefining the way accountability measures can improve outcomes. Are you happy with your current pharmacy partner? Maybe it's time to expect more. Maybe it's time to measure more. Heritage Biologics. We measure it, we report it, we share it.
Well, welcome back. This is Sheila Arquette and from the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy. And joining me today is Christopher Kennedy from Heritage Biologics, and you are listening to the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast on the Pharmacy Podcast Network. So, Christopher, before the break, we were talking about some of the augmented reality tools that you use to enhance the patient experience. Are there other tools or other devices that you're currently utilizing?
Yeah, it's an interesting term, right? Like innovation in specialty pharmacy today. I almost equate the innovation term to additional value that we could bring as an industry around managing the drug, which we're all very savvy at doing. And so for us, we looked at different ways in which if the $1 bill gets you a certain service today, a traditional pharmacy service, for example, what else could we augment around the patient and supplement with them on their journey towards a better outcome that we can measure? And we think education, clearly there's some advancements that we can do there. One of the organizations we've been working with is Vuku Health. They do educational videos. So when our patient has the handheld Rare Care device in their hand for that 4-hour infusion, instead of reading about the disease state or the particular medication that they're on, Vuku does a nice job of having preloaded videos so that our patient can hit the box, actually watch a nurse or a patient discuss with a disease state or their medication, and we're able to report that back to the doctor's office that there was an additional follow-up on the whys a patient might be on a medication. It's amazing how often our patients will be quizzing our nurses on the why do I have to be on this therapy. So it's been a great little filler for having more of an interactive educational process versus just expecting people to read it. And then, Sheila, I think one of the things I'd love to talk about is our virtual care platform. So we have worked with Avizia, which is the first URAC-accredited telehealth organization, as our platform to provide HB Now. And HB Now is our app on a phone or on the computer where patients can gain virtual access to both a pharmacist and a nurse 24/7. The great thing about this is those data engagements, all those interactions are then shared with that patient stakeholder. So the primary physician, the prescribing physician, back to us at Heritage, and keeping that kind of continuity of care around an interaction, whether that happened at 2 o'clock in the morning or it happened, at 7 p.m. at night. Also, it allows us to use established technologies like virtual care to visually assess the situation, which I've been surprised to see how something so small as adding that technology to a phone call can really play into helping to better determine if we have to deploy a nurse or if we need the patient to meet with a pharmacist live, et cetera. So that's been something that I feel like helps us advance the agenda around, making patient experience a measurable outcome. And we feel that's very possible, right? So we've been tracking data now for 3 years. We know we can show you today, Sheila working for a PBM, hey, here's the patient experience in terms of not just quality of life metrics or patient-reported outcome measures, but how those experiences are impacting the patient's true health outcome. And I think you would probably agree, Sheila, in your position or your previous position, that would have been wonderful to have, right? Some sort of dashboard so you can see how the population was doing.
Absolutely. And, I think one of the things that we learned with the emergence of the health insurance exchanges was about how important the patient experience and satisfaction is, and that it's now not, a one-size-fits-all type approach. And we no longer have, HR directors making insurance decisions for a large group of people. We actually have folks going out to shop for other consumer type products, like they do with, cars and clothes and things like that. So you really have to be able to be nimble and be able to react and be flexible and to meet the patient, where they are. Right? It's not so much dictating that this is what we're offering you and you have to take it. It's now being able to adjust and to meet their needs.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, my favorite quote from Michael Porter around kind of what we're talking about, and it's interesting, I think when you say value-based care today, the discussion can go a number of ways. And I think sometimes we almost make it too complex. Mm-hmm. But I think, I can't really hear that Michael Porter actually stated this in one of his articles. I think it was really early, like in 2007-ish. But he said that ultimately healthcare fails the most basic test. It's not organized around the needs of the patient. Right, and that's a very simple 2 sentences, but ultimately healthcare fails the most basic test. It's not organized around the needs of the patient. And I think the more and more we start to look at innovation, the more and more we actually take a step back and we surround that patient with these additional resources. And when I say resources, right, it's not the business jargon of resources. It could be just a phone call to the right person to help them. Maybe they lost their insurance, for example. I mean, we spend a lot of time seeing the gaps in care that exist where a patient might have a life-altering event, and without us trying to help them get to the right resources, they might be going at risk for 2 or 3 months where, it's a critical condition, and if they don't have somebody like us in their corner, they purely can't get back on to that insurance and protect themselves. So I think that's also understanding that there's not always a, quote, business side to what we do, but there's a true clinical side to helping that patient on their journey, regardless of the business implications. And I think that's what I'd end on highlighting here with our innovations is I have a clear understanding as the COO that these aren't, quote, revenue generating, return on investments. So what we know they are, though, is a benefit to the entire patient journey that leads to an accountability of high performance that then leads to a positive health outcome. And I think as we're seeing in the media today, with the Amazons of the world getting involved in healthcare, we're going to be held to this competitive standard where our performance data is going to matter like never before. And competing on the margin of drug and what we make on the drug today, it's a race to see what we can do to turn that margin into a more positive health outcome. So I'm thrilled a bit whenever I get the platform to talk about these topics, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I just kind of wanted to pivot a little bit, and maybe we can just briefly discuss your, Heritage Biologics' role in the rare disease space. I know that February 28th is Rare Disease Day, and I was just reading that 1 in 10 patients now is diagnosed with a rare disease. So maybe it doesn't seem as potentially, as rare as we once thought. But can you share a little bit about how it is that you manage the outcomes of these patients?
Yeah, no, it's a great highlight for Heritage Biologics overall, right? So our co-founder is a rare disease patient. He was actually a hemophiliac. He's about my age, Sheila. So it's interesting because Chris and I have shared an office. One of the commitments that our owner made when I joined the organization was he wanted me really to be entrenched and understand what it's like to have that rare condition. I had not been exposed to hemophilia before this venture. And so I've firsthand seen the trials and tribulations of having to infuse every other day, sometimes every day, what it's like to have a cadaver knee replacement, for example, the pain associated, et cetera. So our culture, right, as we built it, was based on that. If a patient could build a specialty pharmacy, a home infusion nursing provider agency, how would they build it? And you're right. Yesterday was, Rare Disease Day nationwide and even on a global stage. And for us, what a great moment for us to celebrate a lot of our patients and their journeys. And we've done a number of things to try and embrace patients, not just a single day event like that, but throughout the year. We did an event that mirrored the Rare Disease Day, and it was Share Your Shoes, Share Your Story, where our patients would actually bring in a pair of shoes and talk about where those shoes had been. And you want to talk about an inspiring day, just hearing people talk about the journey that their pair of shoes has been through. Not only is it a learning event, it's shocking in some regards, but it's extremely motivating when you're in the executive leadership team of a company that can affect change for those patients. And I think you saw yesterday on social media, a lot of our staff painted their face for that day. There's an organization that published a video where people painted their faces in different ways to embrace that we're all different. But there's a unifying factor to all of our rare disease patients. And like you said, it's not, a rare condition is rare in itself, but it's not rare when you look at the entire population. If 1 out of 10 patients or 1 out of 10 people might be a patient in a category. And what we've tried to do, Sheila, is whether you come to us with a very rare disorder or, quote, more common, that doesn't matter, right? But what we do know is if we champion your health, we champion your mental health as well. We champion you as a collective person on the patient experience side, and we're able to get you to feel empowered in your care and truly engaged where you're calling us and we're not calling you, then the health outcome will reflect that. And we're able then to angle toward shared risk contracting and some of these other buzzwords that are out there where we feel so confident that our patients are so well taken care of and they're so engaged in their care that as an organization from a performance perspective, we then can go to the next step with our RDOM rare disease program and go to a payer and say, listen, we feel that we're so good at managing these patients. We have such a great interaction with them on a frequent basis that we want to show you how we can save money and increase outcomes and maybe go at risk of that, right? Where if we don't perform at a high level, there's a consequence. And patients in the rare disease space, and I had a lot of feedback via social media yesterday, they know that about us, that we're out there kind of fighting on behalf of them. And so the culture of our company speaks for itself, where I think you'll see our staff get really engaged in this. And if you survey people in your company, most of us are affected, at least through a family member, with some sort of rare condition. And so I think there's a unifying force behind it.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that you will agree. I think, especially as my role, as the pharmacy director for the health plan, is getting patients engaged and getting patients to assume some of that accountability for their own, disease and treatment, I really think is key, to help driving successful outcomes. And I think a lot of it is through education. And again, it's through coming up with innovative ways, devices, tools, similar to the things that we discussed on how to get folks better engaged.
Yeah, and I speak about this often, but you just look at healthcare today when you go to a primary care physician visit, and if you're not having a great experience, I felt this many times now, having 3 children, it's like that feedback loop doesn't exist today where there's any teeth to it, right? So if I'm frustrated with my care, that to me is kind of square one. Or also the flip side, if I love the experience, so there's not really a great mechanism for that to have a lot of meaning, even at the ground level of just going to see a doctor today. Now there are pockets of centers of excellence that do have mechanisms in place, but I'm saying from a personal standpoint, I feel that we are on this, point of inflection or we can shoot up and really increase patient satisfaction, therefore patient engagement. Because if I know my voice matters, myself as a patient, then you have an entirely different dialogue with me. Because if I know I make a phone call to Heritage Biologics and something meaningful, that there's a benefit to it, that I know they're going to go fight on my behalf with over an insurance company issue or whatever the task might be, then I am truly engaged. And it's not a survey that I fill out for Heritage Biologics, right? It's knowing that if I call my patient experience navigator and I have an issue maybe outside of my drug, that I can get help, we'll see our scores go up. For example, we're going to call each patient once a month, right? So 12 of those interactions are us being proactive. When I see the number creep up to where patients interacted with Heritage 20 or 30 times in a year, then I know those other calls are that patient leaning on us. And that's exactly where I think value-based care is going to take us. It'll be a competition like it should be on who's doing the best at helping a patient truly maximize their care. So it's exciting. You can probably hear the passion in my voice. I mean, this is why I'm in healthcare today.
Awesome. Yes. And you can, the passion is palpable, and that's awesome. And those are, I think, that's why folks get into specialty pharmacy. And thank you so much for joining us today and telling us a little bit about Heritage Biologics and all that you are doing each and every day to put, the special in specialty pharmacy.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Sheila. Thanks again. And I look forward to connecting with everybody again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast. Be sure to share this podcast with your fellow pharmacists, doctors, and healthcare providers dedicated to optimal patient care. If you have ideas for future episode topics, please email the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Send your message to publisher@pharmacypodcast.com.